Today on The State of Us, wages outpace prices, but it depends on who you are. Welcome to The State of Us. I'm your host, Justin T. Weller, joined today by the one and only, your friendly redneck liberal and the senior resident historian here at True Chat, Mr. Lance Jackson. Today, we're going to look at how median earnings rose by 7.4% in 2022, with the biggest gains for Black and younger workers. So if you belong to certain groups, your wages increase outpaced price increases, which sounds like good news, but there's a lot of caveats here. And Lance knew we were going to have to do this one because it's got, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 14 charts. So yeah, there's quite a lot of charts. So we're going to look at wages by education.
You know, but if you have nothing to start with and you get a raise, it's going to be bigger, right?
Right. Yeah.
So there is that. So we got to talk about.
There's a lot of
is it still an earning wage? You know, a livable wage or not?
Right. I mean, if you were making below a living wage before and you're still making below a living wage now,
is that improvement?
Well, it's improvement.
I mean, it's 10% more money improvement if you're still short and can't afford
you're closer,
a decent place
right?
to live. Okay, well, I guess there is that. You're closer to being not as poor.
That's right. So they break it down kind of by four main categories that we want to look at: earnings, by education level, by race, by age group, and by earning level. In other words, what portion of earners are you in? The data we're looking at here conveys some interesting things when we start to break it down. So we're looking at wages by education first, one of our favorite ones. We could probably spend the whole show just on this.
Well, and the charts, graphs, whatever, are from 2018 to 2022. So it's fairly recent numbers here. So by education, I'm surprised you chose to go with this one first.
Why is that?
Well, because it kind of blows out one of your main arguments on the show for the last few years.
Better pay raises late in 2022, went to workers who attended college, a reversal from earlier in the pandemic when those who hadn't completed high school saw outsized gains.
See, and Justin's always arguing, we don't need to go to college. We don't need to go to college. Oh, but look at this one. If you went to college, you made more money.
The annual rate of wage growth for workers with less than a high school diploma touched a recent peak in the second quarter of 2022 when it was up 11.1% over the prior year, higher than the 7.6% wage growth during that period for workers with a bachelor degree or higher. But by the end of 2022, the median worker without a high school diploma was making $675 a week, or 3.7% more than during the last quarter of 2021. The median worker with at least a bachelor's degree saw 5.5% wage growth from a year earlier to $1,547 a week.
More than double.
Yeah.
More than double. So now where's your argument, Justin?
Well, I think the important thing to note about this data is not that you can't make more money by having a college degree. What we're looking at, and this is something important to keep in mind with all of these things, it's sort of what Lance hinted at the beginning, is the rate at which the increases are occurring is what's being compared, right? So it's not saying before that, oh, well, you would necessarily make more money if you didn't have a college degree. It was saying your wages were growing faster than people's wages who had bachelor's degrees were growing. It didn't mean that you were necessarily making more money.
But the article says, and why would this be, right? That early in 2022, high school wages were up 11.1%, but by the end, it dropped to 3.7, right? And then the same with the bachelor's degree. It was at 7.6, but had only dropped to 5.5.
Well, I think if you think about what happened, right? I mean, when everything moves toward,
is it kind of shaken out or what? What's happened here? Is the economy shaking out?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're starting to sort things out from a weird time, but part of what took place too, if you think about it, is a lot of people that had jobs that you could stay home or maybe could afford to be furloughed. That's what happened to a lot of those people. The people who had to make sure that there were still supplies and that the shelves were getting stocked and that there was food to eat, they didn't get furloughed, you know what I mean? Or not really. I mean, we had problems having enough people.
And they were at a premium, so therefore their wages went up.
They were worth more.
And then, right. But then once
things start to level out,
got back and the supply chain got better and all that kind of stuff, then those wages leveled out a little bit because there wasn't as much of a need for them. And then on the flip side, there then was more of a need for those people. As we've seen, right, the trend, more and more businesses bringing people back into the office space, and more CEOs saying, I don't care whether you can work from home or not. I want my people in the office. You know, we've done shows on that and talked about that. And so as you bring people back into the office, then their wages have gone up a little bit more. That makes sense. That makes sense to me.
The one that goes hand in hand with it, I think, is wages by earning level. Okay, so the lowest paid workers saw larger raises last year than the top 10% of wage earners. Those in the bottom 10% saw weekly pay grow 9.8% from a year earlier at the end of 2022 to $571 a week. The top 10% received a raise of 5.7% to $2,584 a week. Gains for low-income and low-skilled workers drove broader wage growth throughout the post-reopening period of the pandemic. The thing that sort of came to mind here, and you can react to this, Lance, is we talked about wages by education, wages by earning levels. It sounds to me like when the world went to hell, basically what we realized is that we really need these people that aren't paid very much.
Right.
I mean, man, it'd sure be nice to have some toilet paper, or I can't get any of this food product that I like, or there's no milk, and I kind of need some of these things. But the people that do them are difficult to come by.
And, I don't want to go in the store and subject myself to a disease that might do me harm. But boy, I sure need somebody to.
But I need somebody
to collect those groceries and meet me outside and put them in my trunk without saying hi to me and breathing on me.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
They're very, I need them a lot, but now I don't. Now I don't need them because I can go myself. So therefore their wages start to drop. But boy, when I wanted to protect myself and I had the money available to buy the protection, I really need those people. Yeah. Well, that's kind of sad. But here to me, and you said that, and you can go ahead and comment on that further if you want. But what I see is the bottom 10%, they go up almost 10%, right? The bottom 10% grew 9.8 to $571 a week.
Yeah.
And the top 10 only went up half as much.
Only.
But they're making $25.84. That bottom group isn't making in a month what the top 10% was making in a week. Come on, wage disparity, people. You don't think we have a problem still? I mean, it's wonderful if you want to hide behind, the percentages and say, well, look, these bottom rung people, they're making twice as much more than what the top people are. Isn't that wonderful? But the real number says, yeah, they're still making less than 25% than what the top people are. So they're still providing you your milk. They're still providing you your toilet paper. They're still doing your shopping for you. And they're not making in a month what you're making in a week.
Yeah. And I wish there was, that's part of what we'll talk about as the show goes on. It's this notion of, because it equally frustrates Lance and I when we've talked to students where the answer is just to tax the rich more. Is that something that will make us feel better? Maybe. Is that something that's actually going to lead to better results? It's It depends on who you ask, and it depends on what economist you ask. Because the issue, right, with wage disparity is there's this notion of, well, if everybody, if we could just get everybody to make more money, then everything would be better. Well, no, because the only way that everybody can make more money is if we pay them more money. And if we pay them more money, then we have to pay more for everything that we buy, which in turn means everything costs more, which in turn means it's not as simple as just, and we've talked about, I don't know how many times.
Okay, but here's the historical context in this, all right? After World War II, when we were trying to come out of the Great Depression and the war, and we had a huge deficit, the business tax was up over 70% in America, okay? So people could make owners could make a lot of money, but they were going to pay a high tax rate. So what did they do? They gave their workers bonuses, Christmas bonuses, Thanksgiving bonuses. They put the money back into the company and did things for their employees, gave them a profit sharing program, did this, did that.
Pensions.
Pension funds, all of those things, because they would, as an owner, I would rather give my money back to my business, i.e. my workers, than I would to write a check to the government. And when you think about the greatest generation ever, the ones that came before us millennials, the parents of we millennials, that's why the economy was so good, was because we had a high business tax rate. We didn't necessarily tax the rich. The business tax rate was high. I'm just bringing it up from a historical concept, all right? I'm not necessarily advocating for it or against it. I'm just saying, if you want to go back to those times when it seemed like there was one wage earner in the home and they had enough money, well, why did that go on? What happened to that? What happened was we've cut the business tax.
The other thing I think that we see is when we talk about socioeconomic disparity, right, the differences between social classes and the widening gap between the haves and the have-nots, it isn't just what you're bringing home. It's also everything that goes into what builds or generates wealth. We've talked ad nauseam on this show about the American dream and its changing nature. And I think when we look at wages by education, wages by earning level, yes, are wages increasing at a higher rate for some of those groups? Yes. But again, to the point of the difference between those with an education and those without an education, without a higher education, we don't want to say they don't have any education, because big on trying to not devalue
exactly right
a high school education. Well, that's not an education.
That is education.
Yeah, that is an education. It's supposed to be anyway. But the point that I'm getting at is, yeah, you can say, okay, well, wages, like, yeah, they're bringing home, $2,500 a week. I'm bringing $571. The other thing is, if you're bringing home $571 a week, you almost certainly don't own what? Your own property. Almost certainly, right? Now, I mean, I'm sure there are some, if you're in the right space and, but you probably don't own your own home. And you might say, well, why does that matter so much? Well, how many times have we done episodes on this show saying we have built in the past 80, years or so, an economy around and a class system around owning your own home, not owning 20 properties, or 200 or 2,000, but owning your own home because of all of the wealth building and tax incentives that we've created over time to make it possible for you to then do all these other things. So not only are you so far away, right, 1/4, but you also don't unlock some of the wealth building tools that people of a higher socioeconomic status have access to, because you can't. And the other kicker is, and I think this is a huge one, being somebody that, is invested in housing and rentals. One of the challenges that I see that's being faced is as rent continues to rise, many people who are paying rent pay more than people who have a mortgage, but they bring home less money. I mean, did you catch that, right? Add that together there. The people who are paying rent often are paying more for less home than people who have a conventional mortgage. Now, big thing here. I am not criminalizing people who have a conventional mortgage. Great, because you're in a wonderful spot, However, we have this other thing, and this is where I think the argument goes off the rails, Lance, is, well, it's the people who have the mortgages or own the homes. It's their fault that the system is broken. Okay, well, are there people in that group who certainly did that? Yes. Are there also people, Lance being an example, who climbed out and used those mechanisms to climb out? Yes. The issue is less, I'm less contending that it's a systematic, the climb is the issue. It's that it's more difficult to climb. We've made it harder or closer to impossible for people to make the climb. It's not that climbing in itself is bad, because I think there's a lot of merit to that, but it has to be doable. You know what I mean? And if you have to pay $1,500 a month in rent, but people who own a comparable property are paying $1,000 a month for a mortgage, I don't know how do you ever save enough money for your 20% down payment to be able to do that? We've got two more to talk about: wages by race and wages by age group. Keep it here on The State of Us. We'll be right back. The more familiar I become with real estate, the more I become convinced, Lance, that a huge component in our society of wages, wealth, success are heavily built and dependent upon housing.
Yep, it really is. And just two quick things. That $571 a week, that big, huge 10% gain, is $29,692 a year. So it's less than $30,000 a year annual, right? And you mentioned a $1,500 rent payment. Well, you couldn't make it on $571 a week, because 4 weeks
you shouldn't be able to.
Well, you can't, because when you take out taxes, you can't do that. You can't pay for five. You got this big, huge raise in your paycheck, but you still can't even afford the middle of the road property, and to your point of the 20% down, I'll end with this and turn it back to you. When my wife and I bought our house, we had to pay a penalty the first 3 years because we didn't have 20% down. So we had to buy insurance so that the bank would loan us the money for the house until we had paid off enough of the house to own 20% of the house. And yet we still made it. But the thing is, to your point, you don't have the 20%. Now they're going to charge you even more to sell you the house and make it even more difficult for you to climb out.
Yep. Well, and that's if you can even find a bank that'll do that.
That will do that anymore.
Because why do it again? Well, the banks are evil.
Well, 07 and 08 probably stopped everybody from doing that. The big housing recession.
Right.
We bought ours before then.
Well, it's more risky.
Right. It is risky.
The counter to all of this, right, is that, well, banks were being loose and free with who they were giving stuff to. So we said, well, we don't want that anymore. Okay, well, that also means
someone like me would have never gotten the chance to dig out and climb to the top. I mean, I'm not sure I would have ever come up with a 20%. And with rent continuing to go up, it would have been taking more and more of our 2 income paychecks, right, to make that happen, because we were both public school teachers, and I wouldn't have been able to make enough money to save the 20% to buy a house. I mean, there's something wrong with the system, right? Where you have 2 college educated people who are working in the public sector who can't make enough money to save 20% on a small house. I mean,
how many years ago was that?
And we weren't looking at a big house. I mean, it was 35 years ago.
Are there people out there that want the system to stay the way it is? Of course. Are they working to keep the system the way that it is? Yes. However, most of what has taken place, I blame, Lance, on lethargic, non-preemptive planning and reactive at best leadership. That's where I think it comes down to, because this isn't there were systems, right, that did work. Maybe not for everybody, right? They didn't work for everybody, but they worked better than they work right now for some people. And somehow it's gotten worse, right? They work for less people than they used to work for, not more. And the question becomes, well, how did that happen? Well, the way it happened is we got lazy. We haven't substantively revised these systems since we basically built them. And then we're surprised again, as the world has changed and shifted. I'm not saying that you should have to own a home to be successful in the United States, but we've decided that that is part of becoming successful. So either we have to change that and say, no, that doesn't have to be part of getting ahead, or we have to make it more possible to do that. But what we're doing right now is neither. We're saying, well, yeah, you still got to have that, but also it's going to be harder than it's ever been to do. And then we're like, well, all these people, they're not climbing out. Well, how are they supposed to do that? You can't make it substantively harder and say that that's still how you have to do it to win. I mean, there's an incongruence there that's a problem. Wages by age group. The rate of raises between workers ages 16 to 24 and other age groups widened in 2022. It isn't unusual for young workers to experience faster wage growth in percentage terms, largely because they typically start from the lowest base. The youngest cohort, earning a median of $716 a week, ended the year with 10.8% annual wage growth, compared with 7.2% for the next strongest group, 25 to 54. Older workers, those in the 55 to 64 bracket and those over 65 who often start from the higher bases, saw the slowest wage growth last year at 2.8% and 3.9% respectively. Again, there's nothing super surprising here, but the other thing that I want to point out is that low wage growth for older workers also can contribute to our labor shortage problems. Because if the incentive starts to disappear, why keep working?
You took the words right out of my mouth. If you want older folks like me to get back into the workforce, there has to be some incentive to it. And right now, the incentives aren't there. It's just going to put me in a higher tax bracket and I end up making less money. It's a rope because I do work, folks. Okay. I do work, but instead of making that money, I'm making, instead of making $1 an hour, I'm making about 62 cents an hour because of the taxes that I have to pay. So, and when you're a younger worker and you're in a lower tax bracket, you may be making 85, 90 cents on the dollar because, you're in a 10 or 12% tax bracket. And so it makes it really hard as you get older and you've invested and you have your home and it's paid for and all those things that were advantages of the system that you did. It makes it hard to say, well, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to get a job and I'm going to make 50 to 60 cents on the dollar.
Which again brings, I think, to mind too, a structural issue with our tax bracket system. Not exciting, not fun, sexy stuff to talk about, but very real. Lance and I've had this conversation several times. We go 8, 12, 22. What happened? 12 to 22? It's the biggest single jump between tax bracket groups that exists. And by the way, the difference between 12 and 22 is also the big difference between, are you lower middle income or middle or upper middle income? You basically can't be middle income unless you're at the very top end of what 12% allows. And this sounds like a very first world problem, but that's very difficult to stay in that position because now you're close to being able to take that next step. But the minute that you take that next step, you're actually worse off than you would have been if you had stayed in the 12% bracket. But it's very important when we talk about building a ladder that can be climbed. You start to encourage people to climb, they start climbing, and then they hit this wall that's like, taking the next step didn't actually make anything
If you're
better.
one of those older people like me who look to the younger generation and say, oh, they're just lazy, they're not. No, what we're trying to point out is we've taken away rungs in the ladder that we as older people got to use to climb. We've taken that away. And when I say we, society, government, those of us who are older and have been in leadership, we're not providing the same rungs to the ladder that we got. That's why many of them are struggling. It's not because they're lazy. It's not because they don't want to. It's not because they don't have grit, whatever. It's the rules of the game have changed since we did it. And that's all Justin and I are trying to point out to you, is that because I was one of those people. Justin will tell you, my daughters will tell you. 7 years ago, I was like, oh, you guys just don't work hard enough. You don't work as hard as I did, blah, blah, blah. But when you look at it and you look at the system now, they have to work harder than we did to get to the same point because we haven't adapted the system to the changing economic barometers that our society now has.
Again, there's reasons, but your tax brackets today, I actually was wrong. I need to correct that. 10%, 12%, 22%. I was right about 12 and 22.
Yeah, it wasn't 8, it was 10.
It was 10. Used to be 8. 10, 12, 22, 24, 32, 35, 37. Okay? So your two largest jumps are where? Between 12 and 22 and 24 and 32.
There used to be a 28 because I used to teach this and I remember there was a 28. And so now you've taken that out and made another big jump.
Well, and that's when you talk about removing rungs. I mean, listen to what I just explained. Okay, from first to second, two percentage points. 10 percentage points between the second and third. 2 percentage points between third and fourth. And now another 8 percentage points between fourth and fifth. And then 3 percentage points and 2 percentage points.
Well, if you think about it, right? And I'm really
so in other
simple.
words, if you can make it up to that next rung and get comfortably, now you can step to the next rung and the next rung pretty easily, but only if you can actually make that.
But look what we've done. Made it really easy to be at the bottom.
Yep.
And then you got to jump to the middle. And then it's another jump to get to the upper parts. It's not like it's stair-stepped. Oh, you go from here to here to here to here to here. No, we're like, okay, you're at the bottom. Okay, now the next 3 rungs of the ladder are missing. And you've got to go from the 12% to the 22%. Now we put another rung to the 24%. Oh, then there's 3 rungs of the ladder missing if you want to get up to the next level. That's what we're talking about, if that picture makes sense to you. We've taken out rungs in the ladder, and there's no more climbing the ladder. You have to jump to the next because the rungs are gone.
Last one to look at is wage by race. Keep it here on The State of Us. We'll be right back. The median black workers' weekly pay increased at the fastest rate among those measured, growing to $896 from $805 a year earlier. The median Hispanic or Latino worker saw a 4.8% raise to $837 a week. White and Asian workers saw wage growth slightly higher than the overall workforce. Still, white and Asian workers continue to earn far more than other racial groups. Median weekly earnings for full-time Asian workers was $1,496, and white workers earned $1,111. So, again, right, is it good that the bottom is growing? Yes. Does any of this change the systematic challenges that we've been outlining through the show? Not really.
It's so true. But the other part of this we haven't talked about yet, and I know we're running out of time, but we've said it, right? Zip code. Where do a lot of these people live that are making these wages? Because we know that $1 here in the Midwest goes a whole lot further than $1 does on either coast. And also, if you stay out of the major metropolitan areas, that dollar goes further in the South than it does in the North, because it's that thing called cost of living. And so when you think about where people live, and I'm not saying we separate ourselves, but we all know that there are, different types of people living in different areas of the United States. And so that then contributes when you start looking at these numbers and look at median wages and wage averages, because if a large group of people live on the West Coast of the United States, they're making a lot more money. Doesn't mean they're living any better, though, than we are here in the Midwest, because the cost of living on the West Coast is so daggone high. So that's the other thing, right? Is that all of this is an overall number, but how are you making it work in your locale?
And we've talked about that could also be paired with a flat tax.
Oh, raise my hand twice on that one. I can do decimal math. Somebody just tell me what I owe and I'll pay it. I'm not anti-taxes. I'll pay my taxes, but I can't stand the fact that I now have to hire somebody to figure out my taxes because I can't figure out the tax code.
Keep in mind the first objection that most critics bring up about a flat tax system is that usually it's argued that it would be unfair when comparing lower income individuals and higher income individuals. That's because the same tax rate applied to both ends, taking up a greater proportion of total money from those with a smaller amount of funds than those with a larger amount. Yes, that is true, but there's an important thing there that you have to throw in, which is that's assuming that there are no deductions in the current system. Because yes, the system as it's designed currently, if you said just everybody has to pay their tax bracket rate, right? In other words, it's not a flat tax because your income does determine what percentage in tax, but there are no deductions, none. They're all gone and everybody pays. Okay, then the tiered system we have would be, relatively speaking, quote unquote, the most fair, whatever you want to call that, right? Or the most fair, because everybody proportionally to their income would pay closer to the same amount. However, that's not true the minute that you introduce all these deductions, because often the higher in the rungs you climb, there become more deductions available to you. Because you own things that are now eligible for those deductions. And not only
Which is a system that has been set up by the lawmakers that we're talking about when you mentioned the word leadership.
Right. And not only do you have more money to buy those things, you also have the money to do what? To pay somebody to figure out how to save money.
But how can we make a system so difficult that an educated person can't figure it out?
And do it with any degree of certainty.
And that's so bad because that's my biggest fear is that I never have been, but I don't want to be audited. I want to pay my bill. But they've made it so difficult that I'm someone with a college education and I can't figure it out.
So often when we talk about those things, we do them independently, right? So it's, well, we're going to do a flat tax. Okay, well, here's all these problems. Well, did we change anything else? Well, no. Okay, well, some of those problems would be mitigated if you did them as a package, right? Like, for example, minimum wage by zip code. If we adjusted wages to reflect cost of living in different areas regularly and automatically, then allowing a flat tax becomes more feasible because you're making sure that nobody's ever stuck below a living wage. You know, the other issue is that a flat tax is hurtful to the people at the bottom because if they're not insured that they're already at a living wage, they may end up paying more in taxes than they were before because they didn't qualify for deductions anyway. And if their income hasn't gone up, that's not good. I mean, that makes it worse. You know, oh, well, we'll go to a 15% flat tax. Well, if I was in the 10% bracket and I have to go to the 15% bracket and I'm not making any more money, why would I want to do that? I mean, that sucks. You know, now if I was in the 22% bracket and I can go down to the 15, that sounds pretty good to me. That's the point of the issue with a flat tax, I think, or the issue that I have with it is when it's discussed as a silo. We're just going to do this. You know, it's like, okay, but if the people who
they're not talking to merge two systems or different sets of rules.
It's just do this thing. And if you just do this thing, there's a lot of consequences to it that probably aren't good. Likewise, I think that, you know, you can't maintain any deductions in a flat tax system except for not deductions, but direct write-off, right? Direct credit toward your taxes for every dollar contributed to registered charities, if you want to call them 501c3s, or if we come up with a new thing, registered public charities, not deductible, creditable toward the taxes that you owe. In other words, if you don't want to give that money to the government, you have the option of giving it to a registered public charity. But that's it. And it's not a deduction, it's a tax, credit. In other words, whatever you donate is credited against what you owe in taxes.
So if you owe $10,000 a year as your tax bill,
you could donate $10,000
to one of these charities and pay the government the same as paying your taxes.
I'm going to have to pay 10 no matter what. So do I pay the 10 to the government, or do I donate it to somebody else? If you talk about housing, as the bedrock of the American dream, wages and tax brackets, and you reset these systems together, now you have something that really, I believe, Lance, people that are smarter than you and I, big economic people, that could give us something that is truly better for everyone. It makes sure that everybody is actually paying their fair share. And I don't mean that just against the rich people either. Everybody can do their taxes, if they want to. And it makes sure that all these weird loopholes get closed, and it incentivizes giving back, which I think, isn't that what we want? Well, there's some awesome public charities across this nation who are doing great work. And if they had a little bit more money, they would probably do a better job fixing some issues. They would definitely do a better job in many cases than our government does fixing some of these issues if they had more funding. So in other words, we don't want middle class and lower middle class and lower income people. We don't want any of them to give to charity. That's what we're saying.
Yeah, our $10 or $20 a month doesn't make a difference.
That's again,
we know what politicians have done with those $10 and $20 nationwide donations, how they've turned that and bankrolled that into huge leadership positions.
So again, if you knew as somebody who was only making $30,000 a year and you have to give 10%, $3,000 back to the government, instead of giving $3,000 to the government, you could say, I want that $3,000 to be given to the local food bank. How many people would choose that?
It's too simple, Justin. Sorry.
I know. I'm sure there's some economists listening who can probably tell us why this is all stupid, but I don't know. Give it some thought, people. That's why we're here, right, Lance? That was the goal?
That was it, right? We have a mission, and the mission here at True Chat is to educate people by providing honest, open, and respectful conversations. We've done that today. Sometimes the simple works. We try to make things convoluted, and if we make the problem, bigger and badder, then we'll figure it out. But sometimes the solution is just very simple, folks. If you like our conversations, share it with other folks. They say, well, how can we listen to this podcast? Tell them we're on Spotify, Overcast, Stitcher, Apple Podcast, and everywhere podcasts are found.
The State of Us releases new episodes Tuesdays and Thursdays as a podcast first thing in the mornings. Those same episodes are heard on the weekends on AM and FM radio stations across the country. For The State of Us, I'm Justin T. Weller.
I'm Lance Jackson.
Special thanks to producer Bradley Butch, and thank you all, our audience, for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Be the change. Be sure to check out our website, thestateofus.org, for books, articles, and all the ways to tune in. thestateofus.org.